Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home Inclusion Part 1. This is a special two-part event presented by TD Bank Group. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and we are thrilled to be joining you virtually, bringing people together across the country in conversation. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in Toronto, Tekaronto. I come to you from the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. Toronto has long been a meeting place of Indigenous people, and we're honored to carry on a tradition of conversation. What I'd like to do right now is invite you to join me in taking a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, this moment in history that we're in, and our collective commitment to the work of reconciliation. Thank you so much for joining me in that. The Walrus started 17 years ago as an optimistic project to tell stories and foster conversation across Canada. And we do that in many ways through fact-based journalism in our print publication, The Walrus, online daily at thewalrus.ca, through our podcast, The Conversation Piece, and through our public event series, The Walrus Talks, now The Walrus Talks at Home. And this work is powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for being here, and to TD Bank Group for making this event possible. To start tonight's conversation, please welcome TD Bank Group's Associate Vice President of Social Impact in Canada, Naki Asute.
Good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here on behalf of TD at tonight's The Walrus Talks on Inclusion. Since 2008, TD has been supporting the Walrus's efforts to provoke new thinking and spark conversation on matters that are vital to Canadians. So it's great to see the Walrus continue to do this online to help build a more informed society, even as we're facing a pandemic. Through the TD Ready commitment, TD is committed to investing in initiatives that foster more inclusive and accessible communities. So it's only natural that we partner with the Walrus to mark National Disability Employment Awareness Month with tonight's event. Tonight, we will hear about how flexible working styles benefit people with disabilities and society at large. This is a topic that's dear to TD. Even though in many ways TD is a leader in accessibility, I know I will learn even more tonight listening to the experts that the Walrus has invited here. Like you, I can't wait to hear from tonight's panel, who will enrich our understanding on the barriers that people with disabilities face and provide us with best practices for both in and outside of the workplace. Thank you and enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Naki. The conversation around inclusion, specifically with regards to people living with disabilities, is increasingly important here in Canada and abroad. This evening, for part 1, we're going to be hearing from different industry leaders on how work setups that take into account employee differences can create more access for all and increase productivity. This is how it works. Each speaker tonight has 5 minutes. And then once your head is full of new ideas, we'll have a moderated Q&A session with the speakers and you at home, the audience. We will be hearing from the Director of the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy, Emile Tompa, Google software engineer, Dianna Hu, President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, Maureen, Haan, and Professor, Psychotherapist, and founder of Mind Armour and SOS Psychotherapy, Sajel Bellon. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.
Hello, my name is Emile Tompa, and I'm a senior scientist at the Institute for Work and Health. I'm also associate professor in the Department of Economics at McMaster University. I'm a health and labor economist, and I want to start off by sharing a frustration I have with you. I find that many of my friends and colleagues don't quite understand what I do. They think I do accounting or finance or business investment, and these are all really honorable professions, but don't ask me for advice on your taxes or where to invest your money, because I'm sure to steer you wrong. As an economist, I'm a social scientist. What I do is I look at how we can have a better life, individually and as a society, by doing things differently. In fact, I try to quantify the benefits of doing things differently, sometimes in monetary terms, simply because most people can understand the value of a dollar. We all work really hard for our money so we can understand what a dollar is. Many times I try to measure abstract things that are important, such as the quality of life. Now here's a number I want to throw out at you, $340 billion. That's a big number. It's hard even for me to wrap my mind around, but let's try to put it in proportion. $340 billion is 18% of the Canadian gross domestic product in 2017. It's also our estimate of the benefits to be realized by Canadian society if we were fully inclusive in all social domains for persons with disabilities. It's a value boost that we would see every year, not just once. The market impact of engaging that untapped talent pool of persons with disabilities in employment, that alone we've estimated at $62 billion per year. Think of how many people we could lift out of poverty if employment opportunities were inclusive and accessible. Think of all that independence we've created for persons with disabilities if they were gainfully employed. Persons with disabilities are also an untapped market as consumers. We've estimated that market expansion at $47 billion. Governments too would gain from this. They'd be substantially reduced dependence on social transfers. There'd also be increased tax revenue from income and from sales. So there's clearly substantial spillover effects for all facets of society. In another study we've undertaken with some of our colleagues that we did for the Mental Health Commission of Canada, we estimated the benefits and costs for employers of accommodating the needs of workers with mental health conditions. Surprisingly, accommodating workers generally was not that expensive. In most cases, it only required some planning time from supervisors and managers, and oftentimes it was just soft measures that were needed, such as flexible work hours and working from home some days. Those are accommodations we all needed some time for work-life balance. And the returns were huge. We estimated the benefit to cost ratio of almost 8 in some cases. And even for entry-level positions, the estimates were positive. And so to put it in perspective, can you imagine investing $1 and getting back $8? That's good business sense to me. Even I know that, and I'm not a business person or an accountant. So accommodating workers' health needs is not charity. It's good business sense. It's a win-win, but we need to do things differently. We need to create a new normal that includes everyone. In many cases, we need to change the built environment. We also need to change the social environment. There's a lot of learning for all of us to do if we want to do this well. But if we embrace diversity, if we're inclusive of all persons in work and in other social domains, we all gain. We all will be more creative and productive and engaged. And ultimately, the gains of quality of life will be substantial. And that's something that matters to most individuals in society, the quality of life. Quality of life isn't a market commodity, but I would say that's what matters most. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dianna Hu, and I'm a software engineer at Google. I'm wearing a black t-shirt with the emblazoned words 30th anniversary of the ADA 2020, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, to commemorate 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States. I'm sitting atop my motorized wheelchair, a Permobile. I've been driving wheelchairs since I was 2 years old. I was born with spinal muscular atrophy, SMA for short. SMA is a neurodegenerative disability that severely weakens the muscles, making it difficult to perform many basic activities of daily living. Walking, sitting, even breathing become challenges for someone with SMA. It's been called the top genetic killer of infants. When I was diagnosed at 18 months, the doctors told my parents they weren't sure whether I'd make it to my next birthday. From the start, my life has been a struggle for survival. And that struggle for survival has strengthened me. It's hurled obstacle after obstacle in my path, and it's unlocked the resiliency to confront them. There's a theory about confronting the challenges of life with a disability. It's called spoon theory. The disabled person starts out each day with a small, finite set of spoons, units of energy, to spend on tasks they need to carry out during the day. And once you're out of spoons, you're out of luck. So here's what my day of spoons looks like. I almost always wake up exhausted because I need to be turned multiple times every night to avoid bed sores. So just getting out of bed and ready for the day, that's a spoon gone. Then I wait for the shuttle to take me to work. And it usually has a ramp, but that ramp is sometimes broken without warning, or the bus is too crowded for a wheelchair, even though it can somehow fit the 5 able-bodied people who are sitting next to me. Waiting for the next shuttle, realizing I'll be late for my meeting, that's another spoon gone. Then trying to get to my meeting, navigating a series of elevators with buttons that are too high for someone in a wheelchair to reach. The time spent grappling with the limits and the irony of an elevator inaccessible to a wheelchair user, that costs at least another spoon. And on and on and on. It's not even lunchtime yet, and more than half of my spoons are gone. These are the sacrifices that a person with a disability must make every single day just to get through the day. The physical world is a spoon sucker. But that state of the world is changing. The pandemic has forced the world at large under quarantine, and work in many areas, including my software engineering job at Google, has gone remote. Work from home. And there's no environment more optimized for my accessibility needs than home. I love it. Now I have the freedom to wake up each morning a little bit later with a little less sleep deprivation and a little more energy to face the day ahead. So I'll take that spoon back. I also don't have to grapple with the uncertainty and the stresses of transportation. It's another spoon for me. And not to mention eating and drinking my favorite cups of tea throughout the whole day. I no longer have to intentionally dehydrate myself to avoid the far too few accessible bathrooms wherever I'm going. I can drink, finally, when I want to drink. The flexibility of working from home has let me take back my freedom one spoon at a time. And with more spoons, I can do more. My boosted energy throughout the day translates to boosted productivity. I can attend more meetings and events without the anxiety of planning accessible routes and contingency plans for the inevitable failures in the physical world. I can focus on managing my code more than my spoons. I have the physical and mental bandwidth to dedicate myself to accessibility passion projects, both in and out of work. This kind of freedom and flexibility of working from home has been a long-standing accommodations request from the disability community, and now it's revolutionizing the world at large. I am incredibly fortunate to have a manager who will support a continued work from home accommodation for me, even after the chaos of the pandemic subsides and the world returns to normal. He's looking out for my well-being. And he recognizes that optimizing for my well-being is also optimizing for my ability to contribute to my company. This is a satisfying win-win for all parties involved. So I urge employers, event organizers, everyone who has a say in crafting the way we interact with the world around us. Let the new normal continue to include this virtual equalizing agent of accessibility, this ultimate spoon redeemer. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maureen Haan. I am the President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today. COVID-19 has disrupted life as we know it, and an often identified silver lining has been the proliferation of work from home, or telework as I'm going to call it, within Canadian industries. Businesses have had to pivot with little preparation time to develop temporary or permanent telework opportunities. And the telework picture that is painted by mainstream society is a rosy one. Working from home increases flexibility, decreases commute time and associated costs, which leads to greater enjoyment and one would assume greater employee productivity. However, this chain of logic assumes that all employees can effectively work from home and that those employees have access to proper home-based workspaces. In fact, people with disabilities often work in industries with low telework capacity or do not have sustainable work from home alternatives. I want to dive into this a little bit more so that we can understand the reality of the current situation of employment for persons with disabilities. From January to the end of May of this year, almost 300,000 workers with disabilities lost their job due to COVID-19. This is almost twice the rate of those without disabilities. In many cases, telework is simply not an option for employees with disabilities. Just over half, over 53%, work in an industry that has less than a 30% opportunity of working from home. Those industries are the retail trade, healthcare and social services, manufacturing, construction, transportation and warehousing, and accommodation and food services. So when telework opportunities do exist in these sectors, and remember, it's only about 3 in 10 jobs, they're often only for management or white collar roles. And the stat for people with disabilities in white collar roles, 10%. So given the current reality of where workers with disabilities are working and the positions they hold, telework opportunities are truly not really a viable option. One byproduct of the office environment is its social side that promotes teamwork and collaboration. We all know that. By contrast, working from home may be socially isolating. And this may be more pronounced in groups that already face barriers to social participation, such as people with disabilities. A few years ago, at a youth program that I attended in Nova Scotia, I was told by one of the participants that he went to a movie with a fellow participant the night before. Of note, this 20-something person had never been to a movie with a friend before. And this friendship, of course, would never have occurred without that social interaction. And the obvious isolation was remarkable. Social isolation is quite common for people with disabilities, as 21% report living alone. People with severe disabilities are 3 times more likely to be living at home than people without disabilities. And furthermore, there was a study, an Angus Reid Institute study on social isolation that found that nearly 4 in 10 of those with a physical disability are among the most isolated in our society, the truly desolate. So how can one truly expect then people with disabilities to participate in the workforce, including the social aspects of work, if telework is the only option? Telework is largely predicated on the internet and can be a fantastic option for those who can productively work from home. However, 1 in 5 people with the disabilities do not use the internet, meaning that once again, telework may not be a true alternative. Prior to the pandemic of workers with disabilities, more than a third required at least one workplace accommodation to be successful at work. However, employees may simply not have the proper setup to ensure an accessible home-based workplace. So, and I challenge you as listeners to think about how and where you've worked from home over the last 7 months. And I would bet that the majority of these makeshift setups did not include proper ergonomic furniture, noise-canceling headphones, big screen monitors, voice recognition software, and a fast, high-speed internet that was reliable. These are accommodations that are typically provided to employees with disabilities in the workplace, but rarely provided to a home-based office. And in order to see successful outcomes, it's essential for employers to continue to accommodate employees with disabilities and ensure that their needs are being met during this time of telework. So in short, telework is a wonderful option for some, but not all. It is important to consider the specific and unique circumstances of each employee and their place of work to ensure an optimal level of productivity and engagement. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Sajel Bellon, and I'm an organizational behavior professor and a neurorelational therapist. But more importantly, I'm an adoring mom of 2 and the proud spouse of a firefighter. And why that's important today is because you would think that this firefighter was a strong, strapping man, which he is. However, he's also one that suffers from an invisible disability. And it has made our life and his life very different and something that we've really had to make a lot of adjustments for. And his employers are still sort of grappling around how to best accommodate people like him. And so I'm hoping today I'll give you something to think about as leaders, as managers, and perhaps even as colleagues about how we can create more compassionate workplaces where we can see each other as more whole beings and appreciate each other, not only professionally, but personally, and how that sort of mindset can help us build and cultivate a more compassionate workplace that would really help improve our quality of life at home and at work. Our experience has been that with invisible disabilities, we're really uncomfortable talking about them. And I'm specifically talking about mental health. How many of us are open about our journeys that we are experiencing in our mental health, especially right now with COVID? We've seen spikes and statistics show us that there's increases. We already knew before COVID that 1 in 5 people are suffering from mental health issues and that affect their work and home life. But yet we don't talk about it. And we don't because there's feelings of shame and embarrassment. But if we start to change that mindset again and shift our cultures where we can have these more candid conversations and appreciate ourselves as human beings and give ourselves the permission to be human, we're going to start to create change where we can unstigmatize the mental health conversations and unstigmatize the way that we think about suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety. I know I said a whole bunch of bad words there really fast, but they're not bad words. And I'm hoping that by the end of this conversation, you might rethink of them as more of experiences that people go through in our natural lives. How many of you at home could be going through something really, really bad and then expect yourselves to show up the next day at work like nothing's wrong? And how successful are you at masking that? Some of us are really good. Some of us are really high functioning people, and we can go years without it ever coming up or having impact that other people notice. But we're suffering in silence. A lot of us are suffering in silence. And so how can we break away from that mentality is to build perhaps workplaces where we spend a lot of our time where we're more comfortable and we have better relationships with our colleagues. But why would an employer want that? Because we will reduce the absenteeism that we're seeing. We will get more higher production and higher performance from our people. We will see more employee satisfaction, commitment, and dedication. We will essentially be investing in our bottom line, which is our people. So co-creating cultures of psychological safety that enable us to open up and perhaps disclose some of the supports that we need, some of the ways that we can be best enabled to do our jobs and to do it well, even during the difficult times in our life, would actually help us as a whole organization. That's just one way. Another way would be to provide really good extended health care benefits for our employees, especially those people that are in high stress sectors. Really look at that as an investment. And by making access to mental health days, maintenance programs, mental health check-ins, creating partnerships with practitioners in your area, bringing in training, bringing in programs that really enhance the conversations will really prove to be really great tools for you. So promoting mental health, mental wealth systemically will yield healthier and wealthier workplaces. Investing in cultures that are compassionate, supportive, and adaptable will cultivate employees that are dedicated, committed, and high performing. And really, overall, it would really help to improve the quality of life that we experience as individuals, as families, as working families together. As a leader, ask about what is the one thing you can do to cultivate more conversation around mental health. think about having these conversations and getting to know the person that you work with or persons that you work with so that you could tell if something wasn't perfectly okay in their life, that you would have the courage to ask them if they're okay and if there's anything that they need to talk about. That's how we're going to make change. That's how we can make a difference.
Thank you so much, Sajel, Maureen, Dianna, and Emile. A lot of juicy stuff in there, a lot of truth bombs. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the Q&A. I also just want to say hello to everyone in the audience. We have people registered from all over Vancouver, Halifax, Winnipeg, as well as Mexico, Thailand, and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. All right, now we're going to be moving to the conversation, the Q&A. If you have a question, don't be shy, jump in chat, and we're going to do our best to get to as many audience questions as possible. Our moderator this evening is from the Walrus. She is the TD Fellow on Disability and Inclusion, Aimee Louw. Aimee, over to you.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everybody so much for your thoughtful and insightful presentations. I can't wait to jump into our discussion here tonight. And I just want to reiterate, please do write in with questions, folks, because we really want this to be a conversation, so we want to include you as well. So I want to start out with a question for Sajel, and something that you said. I'm a writer, right? So I love words, I love turns of phrase, and I would love to hear you expand on what you mean by mental wealth.
Mental wealth. Well, we're all born with a certain resilience, with strengths, with so many good things, because we've been overcoming challenges right from the beginning, as soon as we're born. And so we really are born with mental health, mental wealth, mental stability. It's when things get too overwhelming, when things get, too packed on, when we're not using our social connections, our ability to process emotionally and cognitively all the things that are bothering us, and being able to disseminate that slowly, it's when it compounds. And that's where we feel like we can't deal with it anymore. And we starting to get into the mental illnesses. And we have to remember that mental health is typically built on a medical model, which is always looking at the deficits. And positive psychology and the work that I do, we're looking at the opposite. We're taking both into consideration. What's working really well, and how can we leverage that to help with what's not?
I love that, kind of taking a positive, flipping the script on a lot of the conversations that we have about mental health. That's awesome. And I have a question for Dianna now, kind of building on that sort of positive impact that you're experiencing from working from home. And you mentioned that you've gained a lot of valuable energy and spoons from being able to work from home and avoiding some of the barriers that you would otherwise encounter. And you mentioned working on some accessibility passion projects. And I know that you were instrumental in working on inputting accessibility information into Google Maps. And I'd just love to hear you share more about that particular project, if you'd care to.
Yeah. So as a Googler, Google gives you a lot of flexibility in the projects that you work on. So you have your 80% project. This is kind of the main thing you focus on during the day. But then you also have like 20% of your time to focus on something that you're just really passionate about, or something that really personally resonates with you. So a couple years ago, there was an accessibility kind of sprint, a hackathon, which brought together Googlers from all over who were just passionate about accessibility projects. And one of the projects there was on finding routes from A to B that a wheelchair could go through. And this is something that I had been wanting ever since I started driving in the wheelchair and realizing that I could use Google to get me from place to place. And so it was really just an incredible opportunity to work with folks on the transit team in Australia, work with folks in New York, work with folks in Colorado. We were just kind of united by this passion to do something that was cool, that was useful, and that would benefit a large population of users out there. So yeah, we released the feature to have an accessible routes option in Google Maps now. Whether you're on a phone or on the computer, you can get from point A to point B with accessible route. And I think this also kind of speaks to like people with disabilities, workers with disabilities really understanding the needs of the user base, of people who have accessibility needs. So it's kind of driving innovation and inclusion both in the workplace and beyond the workplace.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that touches on something that's come up in all 4 of your presentations tonight, which was the word adaptability. And for example, Dianna, you said like you have a certain amount of time that you could put towards other projects working at Google. And I wanted to hear Emile's take on adaptability and kind of what you think that has, the role of adaptability has in terms of the economic benefit that you mentioned earlier about that huge number, the $340 billion number.
Yeah, that is a big number, isn't it? That's a good question. We often talk about inclusive design in this field, where we make things more inclusive for different abilities. And I think we all gain from that. You know, when things are easier to use, it's easier for everybody to use. You know, technology can be overwhelming even for me, and I struggle sometimes. So if they can make, you know, some of the technology easier, we'd all benefit from it being more productive. You know, so I think that adaptability is really critical. The flexibility too, because in some cases you need to customize things for different people's needs, kind of thing. So a lot of new technologies have lots of options to make it adaptable for different kinds of contexts and different kinds of needs and abilities, kind of thing. So I think the universal design with some customization is a critical way to go, and that's the way we're seeing both the built environment, the technology, and also the social environment too, making your work context fit your needs, kind of thing. If you need to work from home some days, if you want to work different hours because you're not a morning person, that kind of thing, that flexibility and adaptability for the customization for people's, you know, individual preferences and needs, so it really makes a difference. And it often, as we found, doesn't even cost very much. It's just a negotiating, you know, your work arrangements with your supervisor. We all need some of that flexibility for work-life balance, whether it's for our personal needs or family life needs, you know, taking the kids to school in the morning, so you start a little bit later or something like that. So I think that's the way we can really capture and create an opportunity for everybody to be engaged as much as they're willing and able to be.
Right on. And that kind of leads into a question that I have for Maureen, which was about the lack of sort of adapted work from home setups that you mentioned, Maureen, as one of the barriers to work from home. And I just want to say, you know, hearing different perspectives on the work from home conversation is so wonderful because, for example, it works great for you, Dianna, and then Maureen, you mentioned, you know, for some other people, it doesn't. And so I just want to hear more about what employers might be able to do for people right now in terms of remedying the work from home arrangements and sort of like adaptability of the actual workplaces at home.
So it's a great question. Thank you. And I think that I want to just expand it a little bit first and say that the current reality of people with disabilities and work is that a lot of them are not in a position like they can work because they're just not in the sectors that allow people who are in those sectors to work. And so I think that looking at that is really, really important systemically for our country to see where people with disabilities are, what kind of precarious employment that they actually have.
Maureen, I just want to jump in because at least for me, you cut out a little bit. And I think you were saying, you were hitting on the point that not all people with disabilities have work that they can do from home, right? Is that what you were? Okay, and then so please continue. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's weird. I usually project quite well. So anyway, so what I was trying to say is that we have to look at a systemic issue as well for people with disabilities, and I think that so that aside, I think that if employers and businesses do want to make sure that people with disabilities are able to work from home, it's the accommodations that still need to be out there, right? What did I had this, like, so for example, if an employer is going to absorb the cost of providing a computer, taking it out to their worker.
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna just interrupt, and I'm hoping that we can work out the technical difficulties, but I will circle back to that because it's a really interesting point. And I'm gonna bring in a question from the audience now. I'm very delighted that people have written in. From Deep to everybody, so feel free to jump in, anyone who wants to sort of speak to this. And Deep is asking, can you offer some strategies for how leaders can ask the right questions of people who might need an accommodation? So I know, there's always this sort of discomfort with asking, how can I help, or how can I make something more accessible for you? And so if anybody just has points on how to sort of broach those conversations from a leadership point of view, that would be great.
Maybe,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. I'll start by saying that when I was applying to Google, I think it was an open process of just empathy. I remember a conversation with my recruiter asking proactively, we realize there's a diversity of applicants, of candidates coming into Google, and we want to really understand what needs that you might have. And so I think just coming from a place of openness and just asking very broadly what kinds of accommodations would be helpful. And I was able to just say right off the bat, like, I cannot reach the whiteboard. A lot of coding interviews are done on the whiteboard, but I don't have the arm strength to do that. And so they kind of arranged the accommodation of doing my coding interview from a laptop. So a lot of accommodations, I think as others have said, they don't have to be very expensive kinds of things. It's really just about having an open mindset and a willingness to listen and a lot of empathy from one person to the other.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dianna. Yeah, it's nice to hear how that kind of came about for you. Would anyone else like to speak to sort of broaching the conversation of accommodations from a leadership point of view?
I feel leaders are a little bit hesitant because they don't want to step on the wrong toes or say the wrong things. So I think that there's a little bit of hesitation. And what I would suggest is really open-ended questions, like, bringing up something that's really working well for the employee and what you could do that would make it better, what could have been done to make it better or easier for them in the sense of production or ability. Like, let them bring it up if you like, but the idea is to get them to tell you more. So pick an area that's really of interest that you want to bring up, and then ask them questions about that and let it evolve naturally, if that will help to kind of bring more comfort to the conversation. And it creates a psychological safety where the employee will be more apt also to open up if it's more of a conversation rather than just a straightforward question, right? So making it conversational and kind of like about something that they would love to talk about, which is where are they doing well already and what would help them or make it better for them. What would they have liked? They'll probably identify that. What would they like to see more of?
Yeah.
Those
yeah,
are...
Yeah, I agree. And Diane's suggestion about the empathy is really, really critical. You know, working from the person's needs and ask them, you know, they have a good sense of what they need to be accommodated well, kind of thing. And it's in the supervisor's manager's best interest to do that because they want to get the most out of the talent that they have hired, kind of thing. So really work with the person to find out, you know, ask them what they need to make their work well for them, kind of thing. And it's not a one-time thing. I think that's something people don't realize, is that you have to revisit it on a regular basis. People's needs change over through the week, through the year, kind of thing, so that it's something that you revisit on a regular basis. You want to always check in, reevaluate, reassess to make sure it's still working well for the person, see if there's anything else that you can do to help them, kind of thing. And that way it's a win-win for both, you know, the worker and the employer.
Awesome. Thanks, Emile. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, checking in as we go, things change, right? Look, I want to circle back to Maureen. And, you know, the last little bit of our conversation was about people once they're in positions. But, you know, something that you were getting to was that, you know, not very many disabled people are in these positions that are able to work from home. So I'd love for you to just expand on that for us if possible.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay now? Oh, good. Good for now, right? So, so I think that the idea is that if the accommodations are set up at home for those who are able to work from home, then the employer really has to take on that responsibility. And I also want to just jump on to the conversation that's just been happening. And I think that the idea is that the workplace has to be set up as accommodating right from the start. So if you are saying right from the get-go, right from the recruitment and the onboarding of all of your staff, if you're saying we are a disability confident or we are an inclusive workplace, and therefore we will be accommodating, because one of the questions we get a lot is, well, if Joe doesn't come into work until 10 o'clock in the morning, how is that fair to me? But our comment back to that is, well, but if you set yourself up as an inclusive employer in the very beginning, you won't get those questions.
Can I jump in? I really like that point, Maureen. And I'm thinking about that standard we developed where we made sure we developed a management system standard for disability, right? So how to accommodate workers' health needs over the time there with the organization. And we really made a big point of, Maureen was the big proponent of it too, is making sure that the front end, the recruitment, hiring, and onboarding was inclusive and accommodating of people's needs. Because if it doesn't start at the beginning, as you point out, it's not going to work, you know, because they have to come on board with a sense that they belong and that they're included and that their talent is being capitalized on in a meaningful way for them as a worker as well as for the employer.
And here's a question that I think there might be some folks out there listening and they say, this all sounds wonderful. And also how do we get to that point? So does anyone have sort of starting points for, maybe someone's listening and they're an employer, a small business owner, they're already dealing with a downturn in business. How do we then sort of jump into that process of trying to make the workplace more accessible? And that's for, you know, invisible disabilities, mental health, every sort of experience out there.
I would say, you know, kind of looking at our current situation with 2020, I mean, everything we've been kind of going through, we're going through together. And so why not leverage that? It is a perfect time to start creating culture change. It's a perfect time to connect. It's a perfect time to start using compassion in places and environments where maybe we hadn't been open to it before. I think people are very open and receptive to it right now. So certainly, you know, as small business owners, really starting to have these conversations, even considering being vulnerable yourself to start that conversation, you know, whether it's during a break or, you know, perhaps in a meeting where you invite a professional in where they can actually start the discussion and create group situations or activities where people are engaging on that level, and that's the purpose. So being sort of purposeful around it and creating that shift is definitely possible. And now it's a better time, is probably the best time, is while we're in transformation to start the transition. It's going to be the easiest time. So it's actually a good thing.
So I'd like to also jump in here, and because I love Sajel's positivity. I come at it from a little bit more of a skeptical perspective, because I think that we've ripped, and I've said this many times, we've ripped the curtain open, and we've seen the multi-tiered way that we treat our society. When CERB came in, it was $2,000 for people who were working. And the average across Canada for disability supports for people with disabilities is $1,000. That tells what our value system is. And I think that systemically we have to have a hard look at who we are as a country and what we value as a country. And then absolutely talking about being positive, as Sajel is talking about, it's so important. But I really do think that we need some government policies around this. And we need to make sure that we're completely on top of this, because when a pandemic happens again, if we're in the same position as we're in now, and people with disabilities are in the same position of poverty, of ending their lives of care, then it's a shame on us as a society.
Yeah, and I want to kind of just sort of acknowledge what you're saying, Maureen, because you know, we're experiencing this at 3 different levels, right? There's the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. And certainly for us to see changes at the macro level, we need to be instituting changes throughout the system. So what I'm talking about is more at the micro and meso, where we can take the power into our own hands and start to make these changes at home to make life bearable day to day, and in hopes of supporting and trying to advocate and create the change at political and policy level as well for us as a country. So we need to be seeing the change throughout the system.
I also want to jump in there because I think Maureen and Sajel are bringing up excellent points about the different levels at which change is happening. And I think a lot of this comes back to the fundamental definition of disability, actually, because traditionally disability has been defined in the medical model, where disability comes from the individual defect, the genetic mutation that leads to impairment. But really what we need to do is shift our perspective from this traditional medical model that places the burden on the individual to instead a social model that places the burden on society to accommodate the needs of the population, the needs of people who have all sorts of different abilities. And it's the lack of the social structure support that causes disability. So if society as a whole can provide the support, we are enabling instead of disabling.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yes.
hit it
Yeah.
right on. Oh, sorry.
I totally agree too. Well, Sajel mentioned it before. Culture change is really critical. We have to create a new normal where everybody can participate. You know, it's a human rights model that we all have a right to be active participants in society. But there is work to be done at all levels. We all have a lot of learning to do, because and changing the way we do things now, whether it's the built environment or the social environment. And there's policy changes that Maureen's right about some of the issues she brings up. You know, we have to think about, you know, some guaranteed minimum income for people. You know, what's a decent living for everybody, whether you're able to work sometimes or all the time or never, kind of thing. We all have to be on a level playing field. To treat some populations differently than others is just not really an equitable society and an inclusive society. If you know, people with disabilities get $1,000 and people who are unemployed get $2,000.
Yeah, and Dianna, I just want to kind of piggyback on how you said the medical model is so deficit. And we see that in the way that, you know, we're told in psychology as well, on diagnosis and treatment versus looking at mental health from a psychosocial model. And that's changing the way that even as practitioners, the way we see our clients and see our students. Notice I didn't say patients, right? So language matters, and changing our frameworks and the way that we're approaching everything. The change is happening. We're certainly seeing it in the world of psychology. Like I said, the positive psychology movement has had great advancement over the 10 years. And so we're seeing it at that level, and hopefully we'll start you know, with the pandemic and with politics and everything that's been happening, we're in a wave of change at the moment. And I see it as opportunity, because I don't think we would have changed without that shove. And so now's the time to innovate.
Thank you, Sajel. Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, we are wrapping up our conversation, but I have one more question from the audience, and it's from Carmen. And Carmen wants to know, for sure, working from home is positive in lots of ways because it is flexible, and for those who have access to it, as Maureen pointed out, it can be positive, and for those who don't, that's unfair. But Carmen is really asking, what about the social isolation side and the sort of downside of, you know, not having that in-person interaction? So Carmen was asking specifically Marina and Dianna, but if everyone wants to just maybe do a 30-minute sort of response to that, and then we'll wrap up our conversation, that would be great. So we'll start with you, Dianna, please.
Yeah. So I feel this very deeply because I'm working from home, I'm working remotely. I don't think I've seen another human being outside of my parents in several months now. And I think the best way that I'm trying to combat this now is just by checking in, by proactively reaching out to friends, and by arranging, you know, these video kinds of meetings and check-ins and hanging out. Like, I think in a way I've actually been able to do more, to have more meetings and to kind of be connected to more people. But I do agree that it's a tough situation not seeing folks in person. But I think the best that we can do is connect virtually and go beyond.
Yeah, take that extra effort for sure. Maureen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. I think that it's a real problem, and I think that social isolation is something that's critically important for us to be looking at, because again, we're looking at people with disabilities who are not necessarily in an ability to be working from home, and so therefore they are on the CERB or they are on some other type of social assistance. And if they don't have high-speed internet and they don't have, if we're talking about poverty, then we're talking about poverty, and social isolation for poverty is horrible. And so we do have to make sure that we're looking at those social policies that influence people with disabilities, of all kinds of disabilities, during pandemics. And I think that it's a very, very good point.
That's a really good point about access to internet, as well as, you know, an accessibility issue. And I'm so sorry to be rushing through at the end here, but Emile, give us your last thoughts on the social isolation.
Okay, well, yeah, as humans, we're social animals. We all need to connect with each other. And so I think it's all of our responsibilities when, you know, we're in this kind of situation to reach out to our friends and colleagues and neighbors kind of thing, and try to make it work. We're all suffering, but some people are more marginalized than others for a variety of reasons kind of thing. And I just think we all have to take it upon ourselves to reach out to all the people around us to make sure we all feel connected the best we can be.
It's a good reminder. Thank you, Sajel.
Yeah, I'm again going to be the optimist here and just say, look, video conferencing was like something I saw on the Jetsons as a kid. We didn't think it was going to happen in our lifetime. So look, Maureen, you're laughing, so I know that you know what I'm talking about. How lucky are we that we have this? So it's great to connect and to reach out. I'm going to encourage people to don't have service conversations. Don't talk about the weather. Don't talk about talk beyond the how are you? Ask deeper questions. Use this as an opportunity to really get to know people. Ask your parents what they were like before you were even born. You know, get to know people on a deeper level and connect deeply. The other thing is when you're not connecting, and you don't need to be connecting all the time, because I'm in a household with a family, I don't get any alone time at all. And so how are you doing that? How are you giving yourself self-care? So
that's a really good reminder too.
Well, because we forget, right? I was near burnout by May because I was bouncing between the office and the kitchen. So, you know,
yes.
I'm encouraging.
Thank you, Sajel. And I would love to continue for another hour, but this is unfortunately our time. And I just want to thank everyone for that engaging conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emile, Tompa, Dianna Hu, Maureen, Haan, and Sajel Bellon. And of course, to our moderator this evening, TD Fellow on Disability and Inclusion, Aimee Louw. Also, a shout out to everyone asking questions. We had a very active chat tonight, and I know we've been following the conversation there as well. If you enjoyed tonight's event, there's more. In 2 days, so Thursday this week, there's a part 2 to this conversation, the Walrus Talks Inclusion presented by TD Bank Group. What we'll be doing is discussing creating access and opportunity and focusing on community, design, and the arts. And if you haven't RSVP'd, there's still time. You can do so at thewalrus.ca/events. And then on Monday, November 16th, we have the Walrus Talks Living Better with Concordia University. When you go to the website, you can see the other events that we have coming up. There's also videos from previous events in the Walrus Talks video room. Now, keep an eye on your inbox because you are going to receive an email from us. And the best way to stay in touch and ensure that you don't miss an upcoming talk like this one is to join our newsletter. The Walrus is a nonprofit, and our work produces award-winning journalism, events, and podcasts, and we do that thanks to the support of our community of sponsors and donors. So if you enjoyed this free event tonight, please donate by visiting our website, thewalrus.ca/donate. And if you make a gift before the end of the year, it will be matched dollar for dollar up to $100,000 by 2 very generous Canadians, Diane Blake and Stephen Smith, who, like you, know that a healthy society is an informed one. A few more thank yous. Thank you to Andrea Barrick, Naki Osute, and everyone at TD Bank Group, including Farah Kurji and Tomas Chanzi, for making tonight's conversation possible. We'd also like to thank our annual sponsors, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, and Shaw. And as we discussed, community is really important in these COVID times, and each one of you is part of the Walrus in our community. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.